Dear colleagues, Ministry of Defense spokesperson Mr. Vilyen Pidgornyy will speak on Russia's military aggression in eastern Ukraine. Mr. Pidgornyy, the floor is yours.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Let me give you a weekly update on the Russian aggression against Ukraine between March 20th and 26th. The previous week was marked with hostilities of middle intensity all across the front line. Russia-backed militants slightly reduced the number of heavy weapons used in all three sectors, down to 230 against 267 the preceding week. Similarly, the total number of enemy ceasefire violations was lower, 561 against 618 over the previous week. Nevertheless, militants continued using all available weapons. Last week, the enemy actively used tanks and opened mortar fire in a bid to cover their armored units and destroy anti-tank units of Ukrainian armed forces. It bears noting that tanks and mortars are banned by Minsk Accords. As per Ukrainian intelligence, last week Russian proxies were actively engaged in establishing and fortifying their positions all across the front line. These activities were observed near Stanitsa Luhanska mainly, Donetsk airport, and two other areas in the Mariupol sector. Additionally, enemy snipers were more active in the nighttime last week, which particularly indicates that Russian proxies have access to sophisticated sniper optics and military equipment. The number of ceasefire violations ranged between 60 on Monday, March 20th, and 94 on Thursday, March 23rd. Now to the overall situation in each of the sectors. Luhansk. Last week, combat activity of Russian-backed militants in the sector significantly decreased. The enemy continued to open fire against the positions of Ukrainian armed forces with small arms predominantly during the daytime. Militants used mortars in a bid to deliver disturbing fire at Ukrainian defense lines. On average, invaders instigated 4 mortar shellings per day, firing up to 10 mortar bombs each time. The enemy remained consistent in terms of choosing target areas week after week. We're talking about Krymske, Popasna area, and Troitske that came regularly under the enemy fire. Last week, the daily number of ceasefire violations by the enemy in the sector ranged between 9 and 16. Now, as far as the Donetsk sector is concerned, the enemy continued delivering low and medium intensity fire against Ukrainian defenders across the whole front line, opening fire both day and night. Militants regularly used infantry fighting vehicles at Svetlodarsk and tanks near Avdiivka and adjacent positions. Last week, the enemy was most active on March 23rd in the sector. Throughout the whole day, the invaders engaged Ukrainian troops with mortars in several locations, followed by 3 powerful artillery attacks on Zaitsevo, having fired a total of nearly 120 rounds. Overall, on March 23rd, invaders fired the total of 400 mortar bombs and artillery rounds at positions of Ukrainian armed forces. Zaitsevo has been attacked by the enemy artillery for 4 days in a row, from March 21st to 24th. 3 times the enemy opened artillery fire at nighttime. On March 22nd and 25th, Russian proxies launched mortar attacks near Avdiivka that lasted several hours. Last week, the daily fire activity of the enemy in the Donetsk sector ranged between 17 ceasefire violations and 42. Mariupol sector. Last week, the situation in the sector was the tensest compared to all other sectors. Traditionally, the majority of ceasefire violations took place in the Pavlopil-Shirokino stretch of the front line. However, the militants several times used heavy weapons in the northern part of the sector, namely in Krasnogorivka, Mariinka, and Novotroitsk. On March 20th, there was a fight between Ukrainian troops and the enemy near Vilyen. The positions of Ukrainian armed forces and residential areas of the town came under heavy enemy artillery fire that lasted several hours each time. In the morning, two enemy attack groups consisting of 20 militants each set off from Sakhanka and engaged two Ukrainian defense positions. Ukrainian armed forces successfully repelled the enemy attacks. The invaders were forced to retreat. Later, Russian proxies opened intense fire with mortars, howitzers, and grads in retaliation. The enemy fired almost 200 mortar bombs, artillery rounds, and missiles. Estimated enemy losses in the fight were 5 to 8 militants killed and 13 to 6 wounded. One of enemy artillery attacks in Vilyen with Grad missiles was recorded by surveillance cameras. That same day, the enemy opened a combined mortar and artillery attack at Novotroitsk, having fired a total of 50 bombs and artillery shells. On March 25th, the enemy opened artillery fire at Vilyen 4 times, having fired 45 rounds. Russian-backed militants also fired several times at Shirokino with multiple launch rocket systems. Last week, the number of daily ceasefire violations by the enemy ranged between 27 and 43. Over the week, Ukrainian troops registered 9 episodes of enemy drones performing aerial reconnaissance. Ukrainian military intelligence confirmed areas of most common UAVs launches. We're talking about outskirts of Avdiivka and occupied Donetsk, as well as eastern outskirts of Mariupol. 3 drones flights were observed near Velika Novosilka village in western part of Donetsk region. It's the deep rear of Ukrainian armed forces. Ukraine's military intelligence reports of the ongoing military assistance of Moscow to its proxies. Russia has delivered more fuel to the militants in 19 railroad tank cars. Final destinations of this fuel aid were Ilovaisk and Rovinki stations. These are major junction railway stations in the occupied territories of eastern Ukraine. On March 23rd, 4 truck-mounted multiple-launch rocket Grad arrived to Donetsk. The same day, the 63rd so-called humanitarian convoy delivered from Russia unidentified cargo in 40 trucks. Unprecedented frequency of delivering goods for militants by similar so-called convoys is worth noting. The previous 62nd humanitarian convoy carrying similarly unidentified cargo entered the occupied territories 1 week prior to that, on March 16th. As per intelligence reports, the total number of casualties amongst Russian proxies is 30 killed and 57 wounded over the last week. 9 Ukrainian servicemen were killed in action and 31 servicemen were wounded in action last week. Yesterday, March 26th, military helicopter Mi-2 collided with power lines and crashed in the area of Malinivka village. It's located not far from Kramatorsk, Donetsk region. 3 crew members and 2 passengers died. All deceased were officers of the Ukrainian armed forces. Our hearts go out to the families and friends of the fallen Ukrainian heroes. Enemy shellings bring more and more sorrow to residents of the frontline areas. Thus, 31 residential buildings were damaged or ruined in the conflict area last week. Half of them are located in Avdiivka. Additionally, private homes in Popasna, Luhansk sector, Zaitsevo, Donetsk sector, Krasnogorivka and Marinka, Mariupol sector, suffered from enemy rounds and bombs. Also, the militants' fire activity ruined 12 non-residential buildings in the mentioned above localities. On March 22nd, Russian proxies blew up a pedestrian bridge in Zolote, Luhansk sector. What is more, One man and a woman were killed by the enemy shellings in Zaitsevo. The tragedy happened on March 25th. Also, one civilian was injured in Avdiivka on March 24th as a result of the enemy attacks. Over the week, Ukrainian authorities arranged for access and safe passage through government checkpoints on the contact line of 18 trucks with humanitarian assistance to civilians. The aid was provided by the International Committee of the Red Cross. The trucks carried more than 343 tons of food and medicine. That'll be all. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Pidgornyy. Looking forward to seeing you here next Monday.
Thank you.